This is a true story from my life, and I wish it weren't. I've changed a couple of names for privacy's sake, but what you're about to hear happened to me in Seattle when I was 56 years old. At 2 in the morning in my narrow Ravenna kitchen, with rain needling the window and the baby monitor's green LED winking on the counter, I heard my 17-year-old son whisper, "She won't wake up tomorrow," and the bottom fell out of the world. The monitor's cheap speaker crackled. His voice bled from upstairs like a wire pulled taut. Then another voice, smooth, female, older, poured through, telling him to stay brave and finish the plan. The house smelled like chamomile tea and damp wool. The kettle hissed a ghost of steam as I stared at the cup I hadn't yet drank from. Owen was in his room, my son, my boy who used to fall asleep on my chest after Mariners games. And he was plotting my death with someone whose voice the baby monitor recorded as clearly as if she were standing right behind me. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The backstory is slow burn because betrayal always is. I'm an older mom, had Owen late at 39, and I live in a weathered craftsman near Cowan Park. I keep the kind of house that looks like a sweater, book-lined, too many mugs, a plant that refuses to die even through Seattle winters. I've worked most of my adult life as a paralegal for a small firm in Pioneer Square that handles probate and elder law. It taught me paperwork is power, and timelines win wars. His father, Evan, and I divorced when Owen was 11, after a slow disintegration that had less to do with spectacular fights and more to do with silence that curdled into blame. Evan lives across town in Ballard now with his girlfriend, no, his fiancée, named Lark. She is all glossy hair and curated smiles, a holistic wellness coach who says things like, "I hold space for masculine transformation," in a voice that makes even baristas lean closer. I have tried to like her for my son's sake, the way you try to like kale, but something in me always tasted iron around her. The baby monitor? That requires an explanation. It wasn't to spy on him. It began when my sister left her toddler with me last winter, during a week of interviews at UW. I bought a cheap VTech unit from the Target on Roosevelt, stuck the camera up in the guest room where the crib went, then later moved the camera into Owen's room, at his request. After a break-in 2 streets over spooked him enough that he asked if I could just keep an ear out. He liked the idea that if he had a seizure, he never has, or an asthma attack, he doesn't, I'd hear. The monitor became our weird little truce when adolescence turned him into a stranger who ate at midnight and spoke in sighs. I would hear him out of bed and sometimes whisper up the staircase, "Get some sleep, kiddo," and he'd groan back, "Okay, Mom." That night, though, I didn't speak. I didn't move. I watched the green LED like it had taught itself to breathe. The other voice, female, had the calmed-down cadence of someone who does guided meditations, the kind you find when you can't sleep and the city won't stop rain-drumming the windows. "You said you were ready earlier," she murmured. "Don't backpedal now, Owen. There's a window, and you're brave enough to step through it." A rustle, as if he turned on his mattress. I grabbed the monitor and crept into the dining room, slipping my feet onto the soft runner that swallowed footsteps, and turned the volume up barely a notch. "How?" Owen whispered. He sounded like he was trying to keep his voice underneath a blanket. How exactly? Her tea, the woman said. Tonight she's already made a cup. I can hear the kettle in the background. The sound of her smile poured right into my kitchen. You replace the chamomile with the capsules we made. She will sleep deeply. She will not wake. You know this from our work. His voice broke. I don't want blood. There won't be blood. Her tone slid into praise. You are breaking a cycle. You are a sovereign man choosing your path. Mothers who do not release their sons are... She caught herself, switched tacks, as if following a script. You deserve to be free. Remember the mantra. He whispered something I couldn't catch because my own pulse surged in my ears. I stared at my mug. The teabag string lay limp over the rim like a white flag. The idea that someone had planned to use a thing that soothed me, sleep tea of all things, to erase me from my life, turned my stomach into a fist. I put the cup in the sink. My hands shook so hard, porcelain chattered. The cat, Tennyson, leapt onto a chair and watched with that aloof stare, cats reserved for human melodrama. On the monitor, the woman said, Do you have the capsules? A scrape, Owen opening a desk drawer. Yeah. Then this is your initiation. You'll wake a man. I lowered the volume and looked at the staircase. It was a strange moment where I became two people at once. A mother who wanted to sprint upstairs and snatch every hazard from her child, and the woman my work had taught me to be, the one who knows panic destroys chronology and evidence. Paperwork is power, my boss, Victoria, always says. Preserve the record. The monitor was recording to a micro SD card. Baby monitors can, if you toggle the setting. I had months of night songs and midnight mutters I never intended to listen to. I yanked open the junk drawer and felt for the tiny stash of blister-packed pepper spray I'd bought after the break-in 2 blocks over. It clicked cold into my palm. I counted 5 breaths. I turned off the stove and slid the tea down the drain. Chamomile threaded away like smoke in water. Then I killed the kitchen light and inched to the bottom of the stairs, clutching the monitor. Owen, I called up, aiming for casual, aiming for ordinary, aiming for every night of my life. You awake? Silence. The rain kept its whisper going. A car turned on 15th Avenue, and white light smeared across the ceiling, then left. I called again. I need you to take the garbage out, bud. Tomorrow's pickup. The baby monitor gave a tiny electrical hiccup before he answered. In a minute. I stood there with my night robe tied tight, studiously not looking at the mug in the sink, and realized I was already stepping onto the first stone of a long path. If I confronted him right then, I would never know who was on the other end of that call or what power she held over him. If I pretended nothing had happened, I would be the kind of mother I swore I'd never be, blind because seeing hurt. The other voice said something too soft for me to catch. Owen said, Okay, with that certain fatal little exhale young men get when they decide to jump off the roof into the pool. I walked back to the kitchen. The sink was clean. The mug was in the dishwasher, empty, a safer emptiness than I'd ever known. And then I heard him come down the stairs, his footfall skipping the creaky third-from-bottom step the way he had since he was 10, when I taught him how to avoid waking me for Saturday cartoons. He crossed to the trash can, tied off the bag, and moved past me to the front door. I stepped aside. He didn't look at me. He smelled like rain and laundry detergent, and a hint of something medicinal I couldn't place. At the threshold, he stopped. Night, he said into the dark, as if he couldn't meet my eyes. "Night," I said back, and opened my phone under the counter so he wouldn't see the glow, and took a photo of his left hand as it gripped the garbage bag. A silver braided bracelet gleamed on his wrist, one I'd never seen before. I could have asked, right then, about the bracelet, the capsules, the voice on the other end of whatever app he was using to call her. I could have begged. I could have done 100 things a mother does when she realizes the person she loves most is standing on a cliff's edge. But instead, I took the trash bag from his hand and said, "You're soaked. Go back up. I'll do it." He hesitated, then shrugged and climbed. I waited until I heard the bedroom door click. Then I grabbed my coat, my keys, and the trash and stepped into the rain. The city of Seattle, for all its talk of privacy and personal autonomy, runs on cameras, doorbells, traffic cams, tiny lenses in every coffee shop on Roosevelt Ave. I walked out to the curb, dropped the bag, then doubled back to the driveway and bent over the garbage like a raccoon. I tore it open with shaking hands and found what I was looking for. A paper towel twisted around something that clinked. Inside, a small amber vial with no label and the kind of gel caps you can buy at a compounding pharmacy. 3 were missing. My neighbor, Pete's ring cam, pinged and lit the street in a wash of white. We exchange favors. He borrows my ladder. I water his backyard tomatoes when he and his wife visit her mother in Spokane. I made sure to stand under the light, unsuspicious, head angled in a way that showed the garbage bag, the vial in my hand, me padding my pockets as if I'd forgotten something. People get away with crimes because victims don't document. I would not be a victim. By the time I stepped back into the kitchen, the house heat had slapped condensation onto the window panes. Everything looked like it was breathing. I wiped the counter with a cloth as an excuse to stand still. The monitor, mercilessly, broadcasted Owen's silence upstairs. The woman had gone quiet too, or he'd hung up. I tucked the vial into the rice canister. No one looks in rice. And then I took the micro SD card out of the monitor, slid it into a tiny USB adapter from my desk, and stuck it in my laptop. A small folder opened. Dates, times. I copied everything. The first clip at 2:03 a.m. was the one I had just heard. "She won't wake up tomorrow." I rewound 2 minutes, then 5, then 10, until the timeline made a hideous sense. At 1:31 a.m., the woman told him to breathe through the maternal chokehold. At 1:47 a.m., she said, "Remember the lab where we did the trial? You saw the rat sleep." At 1:56 a.m., Owen cried, quietly, softly, and she said, "I'm proud of you already." I stopped the video because I didn't want to hear my son cry and not go to him. I shut the computer and held my head in my hands. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and my fear. Outside, the rain slowed, then started again like someone testing a faucet. In the reflection on the black laptop screen, I watched my own face settle into a new shape. I was not a young woman anymore. I was not naive about how power works. I knew the legal term for what was happening to my life: undue influence. I also knew, intimately, from 100 probate battles, what happens when you confront a manipulator without proof. They spin your fury into their fuel. When I finally stood, I'd made 3 decisions, each a step on the path. 1, I would get the capsules tested. 2, I would find the woman. And 3, I would not confront Owen until I had a plan big enough to lift us both out of this like a crane hauling a car from a canal. At 9:10 the next morning, after 2 hours of sleep, I sat in my car outside the Swedish First Hill Clinic and called in a favor from a client whose mother we'd helped with a guardianship last year. He worked at a lab near Sodo. Nothing fancy, but enough to run a panel. I told him I thought my son had gotten into supplements someone gave him. He told me to bring the capsules at lunchtime and $180 in cash for an unofficial screen because the legit route will take weeks. I texted Pete and asked for his ring footage between 1:50 and 2:10 a.m. Said a raccoon had been into the trash. Could he see anything? Ha ha. He texted back a thumbs up and said he'd send me a link. I opened my email and wrote ghosts of messages, then deleted them. How do you tell your ex-husband his son might be planning to kill you with herbal sleep aids? How do you tell your son you know? I was stirring honey into my coffee when my phone lit with a text from an unknown number. You don't deserve a son like him. Let him go. Then a photo followed. My front door at 6:22 a.m. The wreath I hadn't taken down since Christmas because I liked the smell of dried pine. There was a little charm hanging from the knob I hadn't seen when I left 20 minutes earlier. I felt cold in the way that makes your teeth dentist numb, like someone had swabbed the inside of my skull with menthol. I went back out onto the porch, coffee cup in hand, and stared at the charm. A silver-braided bracelet tied in a loop, a small copper triangle dangling from it with an engraved symbol that looked like a stylized eye. Owen's bracelet twin. I lifted it with a finger, and it made that soft metal-on-metal sound that's always a bad omen in movies. I took a photo and sent it to Owen with one line. Did you leave this? The typing dots appeared, then vanished, appeared again, vanished. When the reply landed, it was 3 words that made every last illusion die. Don't touch it. I looked at the eye charm suspended from my doorknob, the rain beating on it like tiny, perfect lenses, and imagined invisible strings running from that metal to whatever woman had been on the other end of the monitor at 2 a.m. I set down the coffee, went inside, came back with a sandwich bag, and very carefully slid the charm into it without letting my skin meet it. I labeled the bag with a Sharpie. Porch charm, 6:27 a.m., 5 to 12. Paperwork is power. I locked the door, sat on the stairs, and texted my sister, emergency. Please call me. And while I waited for the phone to ring, I realized that whatever this was, it wasn't only a private family mess. It was a web, and the woman at the center wasn't hiding anymore. That's the thing about people like her. They want you to see the thread so you know who's holding it. And when I finally picked up on the second ring and told my sister what I'd heard and what I'd found, she went so quiet that for a second I thought the call had dropped, until she whispered, Mara, I think I know who she is. And suddenly the ground tilted under me again. I froze with the baggie in my lap, the tiny eye glinting through plastic, and I said, Tell me, braced for a name I had dreaded since the day my marriage ended. Because if my sister was about to say Lark's name, I already knew this wasn't going to be just a war. It was going to be a siege. My sister didn't say Lark. She said, Rhea Calder, in a voice that made me see someone I hadn't thought about since Owen was in middle school, the Snapchat mom. That's what the PTA whispered back then at Roosevelt High's feeder school. A charming, lithe blonde who volunteered for fundraiser committees and then somehow seized the microphone to talk about sovereign families and adolescents anchoring into their adult purpose. The principal had gently removed her from an emotional resilience workshop after 3 complaints that she'd gotten students to close their eyes and picture the death of a parent. She had a podcast, a retreat near Vashon, and a talent for showing up at the exact moment a kid felt most misunderstood. She's calling herself Coach Rhea these days, my sister said. A friend of mine's niece got sucked in. There was some rite of passage weekend on Bainbridge, where they had to burn letters to their moms. She paused. Are you sure this wasn't Lark? Because Lark parrots Rhea. I see her repost that stuff all the time. I thought of the voice through the monitor. It's calm, the way it cooed, you're brave enough to step through it. And realized Rhea's voice was a match to the memory I had from a school gymnasium 6 years ago when she'd pressed a flyer into my hand and said, You're doing an amazing job, Mama, but he needs more than an amazing job. He needs a man's challenge. I had crumpled the paper and forgotten the name. I'm not sure, I admitted, but the charm on my door, Owen's wearing the same braid. Rhea's kids all wear those, my sister said. She calls them anchors. The lab guy texted me an address on 6th Ave S, where I could drop the capsules at lunch. Pete emailed me a ring link of my driveway in ghost colors and wavy letters. I watched myself under the streetlight hold up the vial and then tuck it away. And then he texted, Okay, so what's up? Because neighbors don't like mysteries on their street. I said, Owen got some sketchy supplements. I'm playing detective. And he sent back a detective emoji and wrote, Want my wife to take him to school? He looks tired. He really didn't look anything, because the footage was of me, not him. But the fact that Pete thought he'd glimpsed my kid in the night told me this mess had fogged my whole block. I called my boss, Victoria, and told the truth in a limited way. I have a family emergency. I need to be out this morning. I'll still make the filing at King County by 4. She said, Do what you need to do. Paperwork is... And I finished with her. We both laughed the small, dry laugh women do when they've had to hold themselves up by a sentence. By 10, I was parked on 6th Ave S, under a gray shelf of highway. The lab a grimy unit with a door buzzer and a fading for lease sign in the window. Next to it, the man who met me, 30, nervous, smelling faintly of ethanol and coffee, took the baggie, looked inside, and said, You get these from a naturopath? I shook my head. He said, Okay, low-dose sedatives are easy to compound, high-dose too, and supplements aren't regulated like you think. He tilted the capsule, glanced through the gel. Fine powder, could be doxylamine, could be zolpidem, could be something from a fog machine for all I know. Give me an hour. I didn't tell you my name, I said, taking out cash. He pocketed the money and said, I didn't ask. He gave me a claim tag that had a fish printed on it, which made me want to laugh and cry at once, because everything is absurd when your child becomes a stranger. While I waited, I drove to the Starbucks Reserve Roastery on Pike and sat in a corner where no one could look over my shoulder. I plugged in the micro SD again. I scrubbed through the previous nights. At 2:12 a.m. the night before, Owen whispered, My bracelet feels tight, and the woman said, That's your courage waking. At 1:59 a.m., 2 nights earlier, the voice said, You'll be ready by Saturday. In a clip from last week at 4:03 p.m., when he'd come home from school, he said, I told her I'm doing it. Her reply. And how did she react? He said, She smiled like she didn't hear me. I watched myself through a memory, stirring onions in a skillet, telling him about a case at the office, smiling at him, thinking the smile would carry us over whatever teenage rips had opened in our days. He had been trying to tell me something I never let myself imagine. The test result pinged by email sooner than expected. I opened it at a small table sticky with sugar. The screen showed a basic panel, a list of compounds and ranges. The capsules were a compounded mix, diphenhydramine in an amount that could knock a person out for 12 hours, a smidge of melatonin to make the concoction feel natural, and the kicker, a dangerous quantity of zolpidem from crushed prescription tablets. A footnote, God bless anxious lab techs, read, not fatal if swallowed by a large adult in usual doses. Danger of respiratory depression increases with alcohol or other CNS depressants. Risk of aspiration. Use caution. I thought of my nightcap ritual, chamomile tea, a splash of honey, sometimes a finger of bourbon on cold nights, because I am not a saint. Tonight, the rain was the kind of thin cold that makes bourbon make sense. Tonight would have been the night I died drowning in my own house, choking on sleep. I saved the PDF twice. I forwarded it to my personal email, and then to a new Gmail account I opened on the spot with a name I thought I'd never have to use. Ravenna.paperwork. The world looked the same when I stepped outside, which felt offensive. Cars hissed through puddles. A woman in a red coat argued into her phone about a brunch reservation at Tillicum Place Cafe. A delivery guy humped boxes up a wet ramp. If the universe had taste, it would at least dim the lights when a mother learns her son almost killed her. I drove not to the office, not to the courthouse, not home, but to Ballard, and parked 3 blocks from Evans Place, because I am not a woman who shows up unannounced, except today I was. I walked the rest of the way and stopped across the street from his Craftsman with the perfect cedar fence. I knew Lark's car, a Tesla with a sticker that said, I create what I imagine in sleek font. It was there. I texted Evan. Are you home? Need to talk. Emergency. He replied 6 minutes later. At the shop. What's up? The shop is his hobby turned business, a guitar repair place in Fremont where he polishes other people's dreams. I wrote, not textable. Is Lark home? He replied, why? Because I needed to see the look on her face when I said one name, Rhea. Because if the woman on the phone was Rhea, Lark would be her evangelist accomplice. Because I wanted to unspool the thread from my doorknob to their carefully curated living room and lay it like a noose. I tucked my hands in my coat pockets. Across the street, someone pulled up. The driver's door opened. My son got out. He looked older than he had yesterday. Not older in the way a boy looks when he's shaved for the first time, but older like he'd been welcomed into a secret. He wore a black hoodie with a small eye symbol embroidered at the heart like a stitch, and the silver braid on his wrist flashed when he pushed the Tesla's door closed. He didn't see me. He walked up the path like he lived there. The porch light recognized him and came on like a lover. What are you doing, baby? I said out loud on the wet sidewalk where no one could hear me. And then he rang the doorbell, and Lark opened the door, and she pulled him in with both arms and kissed his cheek and said, my man, in that low, rehearsed voice. And I saw her bracelet, the same silver braid. I swallowed so hard it hurt. I took one step forward, then stopped. The last thing a manipulator wants is your anger without your evidence. So I stood there, water gathering in my eyebrows, my breath a visible thing, and in my pocket, I curled my fingers around my phone and hit record, because I had a feeling the next thing I saw was going to change everything. And it did, because the woman who walked into the frame behind Lark, who put a hand on Owen's back and said, "Good to see you, hero," was not a stranger from a podcast or a memory from a gymnasium. It was Coach Rhea herself, in a white sweater that made her glow like a cult cathedral, her eyes a pale, almost unreal blue. She looked straight past them and into the rain, tilted her head, and smiled like she knew where I was standing, and how much it hurt that my son didn't look back. I didn't go home. I went where every middle-aged woman who needs to think goes. I drove to Cary, Park, and sat in the car under that postcard skyline of the Space Needle and the pale mountain like an accusation. I did what women do when they have to outthink beautiful predators. I made a list. Laboratory results, not fatal alone, deadly enough with whiskey. 2. Coach Rhea and Lark are together, probable collaboration. 3. The bracelet anchor is a marker, find source. 4. Evidence, ring cam, baby monitor, lab report, porch charm. 5. Law, RCW on criminal solicitation, assault, and conspiracy. 6. Strategy, don't alert Owen I know. 7. Turn the weapon, use their belief system against them. When I called the Seattle Police Department's non-emergency line and tried to explain what I had, the operator said, "Ma'am, you need to come down to the precinct." With the patient boredom of someone who answers calls no one wants to make. I hung up and called someone who never bored easy. My boss, Victoria. I told her everything in one long paragraph that left me breathless and shaking. She listened the way women attorneys who clawed their way up in the 80s listen, without interruption, like they're tallying angels on a pin. "Okay," she said when I was done. "You have a conspiracy. But cops hate family messes. You need a hook that's not domestic melodrama. You said Lark's a wellness coach?" "Influencer," I said, and the word tasted like aluminum. She parrots this Rhea woman, and now they're touching my kid like he's a project. "Good," she said, and I understood what she meant. Good for court positioning. Find a financial angle. Fraud turns family into felony. I thought of the way Lark had gathered Owen, the way you gather a donor to a fundraiser. "What if they want him to emancipate?" I said. "Get access to college funds, the UGMA account my parents left?" Victoria made a humming noise. "Check activity and check the county clerk portal. TRO filings are public. If they're setting you up to look abusive, they'll lay the paperwork first." I had never blessed my job more than I did in that moment. I knew the portals. I knew the forms. I pulled a U-turn onto Queen Anne Ave and headed to the office. On the way, I called my bank and asked to flag my accounts for unusual activity, my voice as steady as I could make it. At my desk, I logged into the Washington Courts portal and typed my name. It blinked. The screen populated with my divorce decree, my traffic ticket from 2 summers ago when I rolled through a stop sign on 65th. And then my stomach went low. An ex parte motion filed yesterday. Petition for temporary restraining order. The petitioner wasn't Rhea. It wasn't Lark. It was my son. The declaration attached was a masterpiece of counterfeit compassion. It said I was controlling, that I monitored him with surveillance devices, true in a way that wasn't this way, that I limited contact with supportive adults, code for Lark and Rhea, and that I had threatened to self-harm if he left. A lie so bitter it made me say Jesus out loud at my desk. Attached were screenshots of texts, each sliced just so, to make my boundaries look like bars. The hearing was set for Friday morning in King County Superior Court. Today was Tuesday. I had 3 days. In chambers like the ones our firm haunted every week, judges saw 1,000 petitions. I could imagine a commissioner half reading the declaration and thinking, another boy suffocating under an older mother's need. The humiliation made my eyes burn. How deeply the cut had gone. How expertly they'd weaponized the story. Older women are always afraid we'll be told about them. Clingy, bitter, too much. The villain's power clicked into place so perfectly it stole my air. They hadn't just tried to erase me with poison. They were building a paper world where I didn't deserve my own child. I printed the declaration, stapled it tight, and walked to Victoria's office. She read while I paced, and when she finished, she said, "They're good." "They're evil," I said. She nodded. "Both can be true." She tapped the petition. "We'll crush this, but you need to decide something. Is your goal to survive this, or to salt their earth?" "Both," I said. It came out in a voice I hadn't used since the day Evan told me he was leaving, and I told him to pack, while I took Owen to the park, and he said, "You're so calm," and I said, "That's because you taught me how to live without you. My calm is my knife." "Then we go to war," she said. "Step 1 is flipping their narrative before Friday. Step 2 is criminal exposure. Conspiracy to commit assault will scare them. Step 3 is money. You find the money, you find the motive." She leaned back. "And Mara?" "Yes?" "Call Evan. He needs to choose a side." I stared at the petition with my son's name on it and realized something worse than betrayal. He already had. The call with Evan was the brittle kind that leaves splinters. He said he'd seen the draft of the petition last night. He said he didn't approve it, but he hadn't stopped it because he believed Owen needed to own his choices. He said Lark had nothing to do with it. He said he'd never met Rhea. "She's a therapist friend of Lark's," he said, "and she thinks—" "She's not a therapist," I snapped. "She's a cult leader with a Shopify store." "Mara," he said, as if I were being hysterical. "Let's not use words like that." I hung up on him because men who split the difference when you're drowning are not lifeguards. They're spectators who like the view. Then I called Owen. It went to voicemail. I texted him a single sentence. "I love you." He didn't reply. I didn't text again. I know negotiation. I know you never chase. I used the rest of that day the way a woman with too much at stake must. Like a machine? I pulled bank statements and found 3 attempts at transfer from Owen's custodial account to a payment processor I didn't recognize. Blocked by the account's restrictions, but attempts nonetheless. I searched the processor. It was a shell that routed to a nonprofit in Delaware. I searched the nonprofit. It shared a P.O. box with 3 different Youth Rites of Passage organizations, one of which had Rhea listed as program architect. I printed everything. When I couldn't print the smell of panic out of my hair, I went to the courthouse and filed my response to the TRO with Victoria's help. An affidavit so measured it could have stood straight without leaning. Attached, the lab report, screenshots of the baby monitor files with timestamps, a still from Pete's ring cam with a timestamp and me holding the vial, and a certified letter prepared for Coach Rhea's foundation that began, pursuant to RCW 9A 28.030 on criminal solicitation. I wrote a letter I hoped I'd never have to use. I wrote a press email I prayed I wouldn't send. And then I went home, locked every window, and sat in my living room with the baby monitor on the coffee table like a loaded truth. At 11:07 p.m., it crackled to life with my boy's sigh. At 1:12 a.m., the woman's voice returned. "You walked into court," she said. "You asked for freedom. How did it feel?" "Scary," Owen whispered. "Good." "Good," she said. "That fear? That's your old self dying. Tomorrow we'll make sure the judge hears you. Wear your anchor, speak your truth, and remember, your mother will lash out. It's what older women do when their sons stop nursing." I pressed my palm so hard against my sternum it hurt. The baby monitor lay there, simple plastic, and carried the sound of my son's breath like a storm coming off the sound. The cat kneaded my thigh, purring as if nothing inside our house had changed. But it had. There is a point where grief hardens into decision, and you can feel the shape of the weapon you're going to become. I picked up my phone and called a number I never thought I'd call. A private investigator we used when service got sticky on slippery defendants who didn't want to be found. His name was Goldberg. He had a voice like a snow shovel. "I need a social media scrape," I told him. "The target is Coach Rhea. I want every LLC, every donor, every event, everyone who pays her." He said, "You got it," like he was already halfway down the hall. And then I called someone else. A reporter I'd helped 2 years ago when she was chasing a predatory guardian, skimming fees from dementia patients' estates. "You still looking for cults hiding behind nonprofits?" I asked. And when she said, "Always," I told her a story whose ending I was going to write myself. The thing about going to war in the daylight is you have to sleep sometime. I lay in bed that night, listening to the rain and thinking about the cruelty of maternal metaphors. How the woman upstairs turned everything into nursing and severing, as if love is a rope to be cut, not a bridge to be crossed together. Seattle glimmered like a ship outside my window. I closed my eyes and saw the copper eye on the charm and remembered something my grandmother said in her kitchen down in Tacoma, where I learned to make pies. If someone tells you who they are, believe them. If someone shows you who they are, save proof. I had proof. I was going to make them eat it. By Thursday morning, Goldberg sent a dossier the size of a novella. He found Rhea's legal name, Rihanna Calder. He found 3 LLCs tied to a coaching business, a Delaware nonprofit with rites of passage in its mission, and a Seattle home address in a loft building near Occidental Park. He found a Shopify store that sold Anchors, My Silver Braid, priced at $195, ethically sourced, with a copper triangle charm hand-stamped in ceremony. He found videos of Rhea leading young men in shadow work in the woods, a bonfire bright as judgment, boys with newly shorn hair crying while she hugged them like a mother. He found a donation portal labeled Sponsor a Sovereign with tiered levels, $1,000 to activate, $5,000 to initiate, $20,000 to liberate, paired with testimonials from mothers grateful to let go. The donors? Men, tech bros in South Lake Union, a former Husky who made money in crypto, a Ballard contractor with a Tesla. Lark's name appeared on 2 boards and 3 event flyers. Most telling, a Seattle Sovereigns retreat scheduled for Saturday on Bainbridge. Initiates listed by first initial and age. There, 017. I pushed my chair back and stood. My mouth tasted like aspirin. Saturday? The same day the woman on the monitor had whispered, "You'll be ready by Saturday." The timeline wasn't just to kill me, it was to crown him. The plan was to celebrate my erasure on an island a ferry ride away, while the city went on making coffee and coding apps and believing itself kind. I called Victoria and told her what I had. She said, "Good. We hammer Friday, then we hammer Saturday." She arranged for a process server to stand outside the courthouse with an envelope for Ria if she appeared. "You need to bait her," Victoria said. "You need to make your house irresistible." "What am I, a trap?" I asked. She smiled in a way that made me love her. "Yes." So I set one. I called Lark. I told her I wanted to meet halfway before the hearing, so we could tell the judge we were a unified family. I asked her to bring Ria. She purred with that faux therapist voice that had always made me want to bare my teeth and said, "Of course, Mara. I'm so glad you're finally open." We set a time at the Starbucks on Capitol Hill, where the lighting is so good you feel immortal. I spent the next 2 hours rereading their petition until my heart became a motionless thing. Then I printed a single-page agreement with 3 anodyne bullet points about supporting Owen's self-determination. At the bottom, in small font, I added a "whereas" clause. Whereas no adult has encouraged Owen to alter his mother's food or beverages, and all coaching or guidance he has received is purely supportive and non-directive. No good manipulator can resist signing the story they've been telling. I walked into that Starbucks early and sat where I could see the door and be seen. My hands didn't shake. My hair looked like I'd slept. When Lark walked in at the appointed time, she looked like wealth photographed her in the mornings. Ria glided behind her. The room seemed to collude with their beauty. I stood, smiled, and extended a hand, the way I always do when I am going to raise a drawbridge and let someone believe it's a welcome mat. "Thank you for meeting," I said. "Of course," Lark said, her grip light as a cat's. "Of course," echoed Ria, and her eyes rested on my face in a way that would have felt gentle if I didn't know she had told my son to kill me. "We're here for Owen. We're all on the same side." I set the paper on the table. "Then let's make that true," I said, and slid the agreement toward them with a pen. Ria read. Lark read. Their pupils did the tiny dart that shows where a mind snags. Lark smiled. "This feels good." Ria's finger tapped the whereas clause, a bare scratch, a gnat being shooed. "Cute," she said, "but unnecessary." "Humor me," I said. She looked at me like I was a student in her class who had asked to go to the bathroom. "No," she said, and smiled, and reached into her bag and set a small box on the table. She pushed it toward me. "This is for you." I didn't touch it. "What is it?" "A gift," she said, "an anchor to help you let go." She slid the lid off with practiced grace. Inside lay the silver braid with the copper eye, glowing like a dare. "Put it on," she said. Her voice was a caress disguised as a command. I looked at the bracelet and then at her and saw the thing you only see when you've been humiliated deeply enough, that the person hurting you believes they are merciful. "I can't," I said. "Metal allergy." I pushed it back without touching it and reached for my coffee. "I am allergic," I added, and smiled in a way that made her blink. "To a lot of things." Her mouth did a small pout. Lark's eyes tacked to Ria's face, the way a boat tacks to wind. Ria said, "Well then," and closed the box. We talked for 15 minutes like professionals pretending to agree. Lark said I statements. Ria said somatic. I said boundaries. None of it mattered. At the end, I stood and thanked them and shook their hands, and as I let go of Ria's fingers, I saw it, a faint smear of rust red under her thumbnail, like dried clay. I looked down at the box she'd given me. The copper eye charm had a tiny nick, a crescent scar where a tool had struck. I imagined hands stamping symbols into metal late at night, making anchors for boys, the eye watching, always watching. When we stepped onto the sidewalk, my process server wore a jacket and a grin. "Rihanna Calder?" he asked, and when she turned, he set the envelope into her hand. "You've been served." The look that crossed her face wasn't surprise. It was annoyance, the look beautiful people get when the mirror fogs. She handed the envelope to Lark like it weighed more than it did and stepped close enough to me that I could smell something herbal on her breath. "You're making this uglier than it needs to be," she said softly. "Older women who fight the tide drown." "Good," I said. "I've always liked deep water." For a beat, her smile froze. Then she turned and slid into a black car with Lark, and as they pulled away, I saw my son in the back seat, profile half hidden by tinted glass. He didn't look at me. He looked down at his wrist and touched the anchor like a rosary. I stood on the sidewalk, alone, rain stippling my coat, and knew a new truth. They thought they were untouchable. That was their mistake. Untouchable people never check their blind spots. It was time to give them a reason to look over their shoulders. Friday morning came wet and gray, the courthouse on 3rd Avenue humming like a beehive with too many queens. I wore my anchor, a string of my mother's pearls, soft and old, and a suit I hadn't put on in years, navy and stubborn. Victoria met me at the security line, handed me a folder, and squeezed my hand. In the courtroom, the commissioner looked like he'd heard every family in the city declare war. He called our case. Evan sat 2 rows back, penitent and pale. Lark perched beside him, her braid gleaming. Rhea sat with her legs crossed, hands folded. Serenity poured over her like a veil. My son sat beside her, anchor bright against his pulse point. They spoke first. Lark delivered a speech so polished, it could have been a TED Talk. "I felt concerned watching Owen's light dim under a regime of surveillance," she said, and her voice broke at the right places when she talked about young men's rights. Rhea spoke in that impossible calm about mother-son differentiation. Her language so clinical, the commissioner nodded along. Owen read from a paper. He said he was afraid of me. He said I had threatened to hurt myself if he moved out. He said he wanted space to become a man. Then it was my turn. Victoria rose and did what she does best. She built a staircase out of paper. She handed up the lab report. She played the baby monitor clip. "She won't wake up tomorrow." And the room shifted, as rooms do, when a new gravity is introduced. She handed the commissioner a printed shot of the porch charm in a bag labeled with date and time. The ring cam still of me with the vial, the screen grabs of Shopify, and the Delaware nonprofit's donor levels. She read a paragraph from the petition where they accused me of refusing to release. And then she read from Rhea's own marketing language about severing maternal enmeshment in a voice so dry it could have mummified roses. I stood when it was my turn and looked at my son. "Owen," I said, and my voice did not break because my resolve had poured a new foundation under it. "I hear you want to be a man. Men don't kill their mothers with disguised pills. They face what hurts." I turned to the bench. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for a lifetime order. I'm asking for a breath. I am asking you to consider that the adults coaching my son are financially incentivized to isolate him from me. I'm asking for an order restraining these adults from contact with him until we can examine the full record. And I'm asking for you to appoint a gal, someone who can talk to my son without selling him a $195 bracelet. A murmur like wind went around the room. The commissioner, who had been bored when he first looked at our file, sat up straighter. He turned to Rhea. "Miss Calder," he said, "are you a licensed therapist?" "I am a coach," she said, smiling, as if the word were a crown. "Are you being paid by this family?" he asked. "My work is supported by community donors," she said. "Do you sell products to the minors you coach?" "I offer anchors," she said. "They are symbolic." He looked at Owen. "Son, do you have one on right now?" Owen stared at the floor. "This court doesn't adjudicate symbolism," the commissioner said, "but it does care about influence. Here's my order. I'm denying the restraining order request at this time. I'm granting a temporary no-contact order between Mr. Owen and Miss Calder, pending investigation. Ms. Lark." He checked the petition for her last name with judicial disdain. "You are ordered not to facilitate contact between them. I'm appointing a guardian ad litem for the minor, and I'm setting a review in 2 weeks." He paused. "And Ms. Mara, stop recording in your son's room." It was a fair rebuke. It was also a judgment that kept me breathing. The gavel didn't fall. Gavels don't, that's a movie thing. But the sound of pages turning was final enough. Rhea's smile didn't move, but her hand twitched against her knee. Lark's lips thinned. Outside the courtroom, before I could even exhale, Rhea leaned in as if to whisper a blessing and said under her breath, "You can't stop the tide." "Maybe not," I said, "but I can build a seawall." Then I turned my back on her because victories have to be metabolized, not performed. And then my phone buzzed. It was the reporter, 3 words that dropped the next stone onto the path I'd chosen. "Check your email." I opened it and found a draft. "Seattle Sovereignty Coach. Target of complaint alleging coercion, financial exploitation of minors." Attached were 2 mothers' statements, the lab report from my capsules, and screenshots Goldberg had found of donors bragging about liberating boys with initiations. The reporter asked for my on-the-record quote. I stared at my son laughing on a field when he was 10, a photo I kept in my favorites, and then at the anchor on his wrist, and then at the courthouse doors. And I knew nothing I had done would matter if I didn't widen the circle and bring light faster than their shadows could grow. I typed the quote. It was short, and it was true. And when the piece published an hour later, and my phone started to vibrate with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and the comments started to stack like sandbags, I realized the war wasn't just in court anymore. It was in the city's bloodstream. That's when the threats started. They were small at first. A note tucked under my wiper blade. Older women cling. Another in my mailbox. Release with grace or be erased. DMs from anonymous accounts with eyes for profile pictures told me to stop starving your son. A woman I didn't know stood too close to me in QFC and murmured, "Maybe you should let go," in a voice like a lullaby turned inside out. In a city that prides itself on live and let live, it turns out the most Seattle thing a predator can do is make you look like the problem. But it wasn't just threats. Mothers began to write. A woman from West Seattle told me about her son, initiated on Bainbridge, how he came back with a new bracelet and refused to talk to her for a month. Another from Capitol Hill sent a photo of her boy's anchor and said he'd quit school to pursue sovereignty with a donor who turned out to be a 61-year-old mentor who liked to talk about discipline. They'd tried to go to police. Police said, "He's 17, he can choose." They'd tried to go to a therapist. He quit after the first session because the language didn't resonate. I created a folder in my Ravenna.paperwork Gmail and named it Mothers. I saved every message. I printed the worst ones and put them in a red binder because color helps in a war. You need to be able to reach out in the dark and grab the right weapon. Saturday came cold and pewter. The Bainbridge retreat loomed. Ria's no-contact order should have kept her away from my son. But predators don't spend their lives memorizing court rules. The ferry schedule lay open on my laptop. 7:55, 9:35, 11:25. I went to Pier 52 early and bought a coffee I didn't drink and stood where you can watch people stream from the parking lot like pieces of a puzzle being shaken into the box. Goldberg stood halfway down the terminal, pretending to check a text. The reporter had a photographer up on the upper deck, a scarf wrapped around his lens to keep the drizzle off. At 9:15, they arrived in a cluster that looked like a lifestyle blog. Lark in a cream coat, Ria in that same white sweater, like she wanted to blend with fog. 5 boys in hoodies with anchors on their wrists, and donors in Patagonia vests and watch caps. My son wasn't with them. Relief made my knees watery. Then my phone buzzed, an unknown number, and I answered because I suddenly couldn't afford not to, and Owen said, "Don't come," in a voice that sounded like he had run up a hill. "Where are you?" I asked. "Please," he said. "Mom, please." I heard a door close and the ambient echo of a ferry terminal bathroom. "I just need to do this." "Do what?" I asked, and when he didn't answer, I said, "Look down. Do you have the anchor on?" He didn't answer. "Look at it," I said. "Is that who you are? An accessory? A donation level?" He made a noise that sounded like a hurt animal. "It's the only thing that makes sense." "No," I said, gentle but sharp, the way you talk when your loved one has their hand in a trap. "The only thing that makes sense is grief. Your father left, I got older, you got scared, and someone offered you a story where you're the hero and I'm the villain. Real men don't need villains to be heroes, Owen. They do hard things without hurting the people who love them." I took a breath. "If you step on that ferry, I can't stop you. But I am going to file criminal charges, and every mother in this city is going to know their names. If you step on that ferry, you are in a story I promise you ends in shame." Silence. A hand dryer whooshed. The ferry horn bellowed. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry," and hung up. I didn't run. I couldn't run. I stood on the edge of the terminal and watched Ria, Lark, and their men step onto the boat. The reporter texted, "We're ready." I nodded to Goldberg. He nodded to the photographer. And then I did something ugly and necessary. I hit send on a thread of screenshots I had held back, the ones Goldberg pulled from a donor's Telegram channel. Casual chatter about training boys to cut the cord, a joke about sleepy tea, a photo of a bracelet-making night where the copper charms were stamped while they laughed. The piece went live while the ferry shoved off. Phones lit on the deck like stars. People read, heads bent. Ria's face finally changed in a way that made me ache to see it. The control slipped just a millimeter, and the mask showed its seam. I turned away, found a bench, and cried in public for the first time in years. A woman in a yellow raincoat sat beside me and handed me a tissue without asking. "He'll come back," she said. "They always come back when you keep the light on." I didn't know if she meant porch lights or something holier. I held the tissue like a relic and stared at the place in the Sound where the ferry had been. When I got home, the porch light was on, even though I hadn't left it. On the doorknob hung another charm, a copper triangle without the braid, stamped with a new symbol that looked like a sun slipping into water. Beneath it, a note in Ria's delicate script. "The tide is stronger than you." I put the charm in a bag. I labeled it. I placed it next to the first one in my red binder and closed the cover with a soft, belligerent thud. And then I turned on every light in my house and sat in the armchair by the front window and waited. Because waiting is what war feels like between battles. All lamps and breath and the small sounds of a city pretending everything is normal. Until a car pulls to the curb and your boy steps out with his hood up and you stand and open the door before he can knock. He stood there looking smaller than he had on Tuesday. He held his anchor in his hand like it had burned him. He didn't cry. He said, "I didn't go." And then he added, "I'm sorry." And I was careful, so careful, not to make this about my hurt. "I know," I said. "Come in." Owen slept for 16 hours with the cat on his feet like a sentry. He ate an omelet I made with one hand while I emailed the detective assigned to my complaint with the other. He sat on the stoop and watched a crow hop along the sidewalk like it had advice. He didn't talk about Saturday, not at first. Shame likes to keep its teeth in your throat. When he finally did speak, he did it in the kitchen, back where it started. The baby monitor unplugged and silent on a shelf because you don't need to listen when someone is finally telling the truth. "She told me you were killing me," he said in a voice like paper. "She said older women drain young men, that I'd never be free if I kept waiting for you to approve my life. She said the capsule would just help you let go, that if we did it together, I'd be initiated, and I'd be surrounded by men who would be my fathers. Fathers, not father, plural." The word made my skin push needles outward from the inside. "And Lark?" I asked. "She said you'd try to make me choose," he said. "She said you'd make it a war." I smiled without humor. She does like to make a story tidy. He touched the anchor on the counter with 2 fingers, like it was a creature that might move. "I thought I was being brave," he said. "I thought it meant I wasn't a child." "You are brave," I said, and when he looked up fast, I nodded. "You are. You told me. You came home. You're telling me now. That's adult. Heroes always think the wrong thing is the only thing long enough to learn what the right thing is." He nodded slowly, as if what I had said was a blanket he could pull up to his chin. Then he said, "I'm going to testify," and his voice didn't shake. We did not stage a victory parade. We called the detective. We gave him the lab report, the micro SD recordings, the screenshots, the binder. We met with the prosecutor's office in a beige room at the King County Courthouse, where a woman with blunt bangs and a stern gentleness took notes and said words like charging decision and solicitation. We sat in a second courtroom 2 weeks later when the commissioner extended the no-contact orders and referred Lark's professional conduct to the Attorney General's Office for Deceptive Practices. We waited while Ria's lawyer, sleek, oily, tried to float words like speech and coaching like they were lifeboats. We waited more. Waiting is the hardest war. But there is something else women teach each other, that slow kills count. The reporter's follow-up scattered donors like pigeons. One tech bro resigned from a board. The husky deleted his account. The contractor posted a vague apology about learning and supporting the masculine responsibly. Mothers gathered on Sundays in the park and swapped names, numbers, lawyers. The anchor store's Shopify shut down. The P.O. box went dark. A new one opened in Tacoma with a different symbol and the same grammar. You can cut off one head of a hydra. Sometimes you have to build a fence. The revenge itself didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like paper and court dates and a flow of money dammed until it made a lake at the villain's feet. It felt like walking into the King County Superior Court on a chilly morning in December, months later, with Owen in a coat too big for him and sitting across from Rhea while the prosecutor read the charge. Criminal solicitation to commit assault in the second degree, conspiracy to commit the same, and deceptive practices under the Consumer Protection Act. It felt like listening to my son, now 18, tell the court he was sorry. It felt like hearing Rhea's voice crack for the first time when the judge handed down a suspended sentence, fines, mandated cessation of coaching minors, and 5 years of probation that would unravel every live event she had planned. It felt like the donors' names appearing in the paper, slow and steady, because money is a spotlight. When it was over, she turned to me and smiled without her eyes. "You've won a battle," she said. "The tide still comes." I had no poetry left. "Maybe," I said. "But so does winter." She flinched, just a fraction, as if she finally felt the cold. We walked out into weak sunlight on 3rd Avenue, like ordinary people rebuilding a life. Evan waited by the curb, wringing his hands. He said he was sorry, that he had been naive, that Lark had joined a meditation group in Ojai and wouldn't be back. I told him I believed him, because forgiveness is another weapon, one you use on yourself when you're done stabbing the past. We went home to Ravenna. I made tea. I threw the chamomile in the trash because rituals matter. Then I poured us both peppermint and stood at the sink, looking into my own window at our reflections. Owen leaned on the counter, silent, the cat a warm comma at his elbow. "You want to keep the anchor?" I asked, gesturing at the silver braid in the drawer where I'd hidden it from myself. He shook his head and said, "Let's melt it." And I laughed, because revenge is rarely molten. But sometimes you get a little fire. We didn't have a forge. We had a hammer. We took it into the garage and pounded the copper triangle into a bent coin, loud and ridiculous, until it couldn't be a symbol of anything but ruin. Then we hung it from a nail on the garage wall, like a scalp from some old grim victory. Weeks passed, months. He went to therapy, real therapy, at a clinic near UW where the couches aren't great, but the questions are. I learned to leave doors ajar again, literal and otherwise. We ate pancakes on Sundays at Portage Bay Cafe and pretended food is an answer when it's actually a peace treaty. We got used to the way quiet sounds when it's not a threat. Every now and then, an envelope would arrive without a return address. Inside would be a paperback about radical sovereignty or a printout of a blog post about the mother wound. I put them in a bin labeled potential evidence and stuck it on a shelf. Once, late, after Owen went to bed, I took the baby monitor down from the shelf and held it. It was light, stupid, a piece of plastic that had saved my life anyway. That night, Much later, I woke to rain and the smell of peppermint. I went to the kitchen and stood where I had stood, in the place where my son had almost broken my heart, in a way that would have stopped it. I touched the counter. I touched the sink. I thought about the way the sea chews pilings even on days you can't hear it. The house hummed its old song. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Not a threat, not a plan. Just a boy getting up to use the bathroom, then getting back into bed. When I turned off the light and stood in the doorway, something in the dark pressed a weight against me that wasn't grief and wasn't triumph. It was the kind of feeling you get on a ferry at night when you can't see land, just the churned water behind you, lit by the ship's wake. Proof you're moving forward, that something carries you that isn't your own strength, that darkness can be traversed with the sound of a motor, and the faith that the captain knows where the dock is. I went upstairs. I paused outside his door and did not listen. I went to my room and set the baby monitor gently in the back of the closet, like a retired weapon. Then I lay down in a house that had tried to become my coffin and became, instead, what it had always been, a place where mothers and sons learn to live with their ghosts. And every so often, when the rain hits the window at 2 a.m, and I wake with my heart racing, I remember his whisper through the monitor, and I remember the voice that wanted it to be the last one I ever heard. And I give myself permission to be afraid for a moment. And then I get up, and I make peppermint tea, and I stand in my kitchen, and I watch the green LED of the dishwasher wink like a ship light, and I let the tide come and go without me in it. Because survival is not a happy ending. It's a skill. It's a muscle. It's a harbor we build with our own hands on nights when the water tries to take everything back. And if you were to walk by my house at that hour, you'd see the porch light is on, and you'd see the silhouette of a woman older than she used to be, standing in the window with a mug. And you might think she is waiting for something terrible to happen. But she isn't waiting. She's listening to the quiet, to the rain, to the small sound a boy makes when he turns in his sleep. And she's smiling a little, a thin blade of a smile you don't see unless you look close, the kind people wear when they've learned that revenge done right doesn't look like a firework. It looks like a lighthouse. The end.